Good morning, kids. Today we're going to continue talking about the resurrection and the really interesting things that Jesus did on the earth once he came back to life and he walked around for those 40 days and people were able to talk with Jesus and see them with their eyes and were really able to know that he indeed rose from the dead. Today we're going to talk about two special people who saw Jesus, but first I have a question for you. Have you ever had a friend or maybe an acquaintance, like a teacher that you knew pretty well, or maybe a coach that you hadn't seen in a while, but they were a really big part of your life? And then maybe you saw them and you looked at them across the room and thought, is that my coach or my teacher? Is that my friend from soccer a long time ago? But you weren't so sure who it was. They just seemed pretty familiar to you. You think of maybe a friend that you only saw on swim team, or maybe your coach. Maybe your coach, every time you see them, they wear a summer hat because this is what you wear when you're hot and you're in the sun and you're coaching swim because you don't want to get your face burnt. And so you're really only used to seeing them with this hat on. And so you recognize them like that. And then maybe it's a cold day and you're driving by and all of a sudden you see someone shoveling snow with this kind of hat on and you think, is that my swim coach? I can't really tell. They look completely different with a winter hat. I have no idea what they look like, and I'm not sure if that's that person, and you just don't recognize them. Well, that's what happened today in our story with two people who knew Jesus, but didn't recognize him right away after he came back to life. Matter of fact, they had an entire conversation with him before they realized who he was. Now we're in Luke 24, and these two gentlemen, one of them, his name is Cleopas, he is walking along the road with his friend, and he knows what everybody else in Jerusalem knows, which is that Jesus was crucified, and they're really confused by it because they thought he was coming to be their king, and they were pretty sad. So he's talking with his friend, and these two friends come upon another person. Well, the other person has no idea what they're talking about. And so Cleopas says to him, are you the only person in all of this area who has no idea what just happened? This man, this great man named Jesus was crucified. We thought he was going to be our leader. Well, here's the interesting thing. As they're walking, they're headed toward Emmaus, a town called Emmaus. This third person who has no idea what's going on starts telling them all about the scriptures and how the Messiah was supposed to come and he was one that should suffer. And it says in verse 26 of chapter 24 in Luke, was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into glory? And beginning with Moses and the prophets, he began to interpret in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Because you know who that third person was? That third person was Jesus. And they didn't recognize Jesus at all. And it wasn't until they started to have this feeling, this guy's kind of cool. So they invite him to dinner. And so they sit down to dinner with Jesus and something happens that helps them recognize it. You want to know what it is? You guessed that it was a piece of bread? You're right. So Jesus sits with them at the table, at the meal, and he breaks the bread. And when he breaks the bread, all of a sudden their eyes are opened. And after their eyes were opened and they realized that it was Jesus, he vanished, the Bible tells us, and they're so amazed. And they know that they truly have seen the risen Messiah. Next week, we'll talk more about some amazing things that Jesus did on those 40 days where he walked upon the earth before he went back to heaven. I'll see you next week.